On Ticker, this is Import Export with Lawrence Christophels.
Now we've got David here joining us from Sydney, David McCredie from the Australian British Chamber of Commerce. Hi David, thanks for joining me.
Hi, how are you?
Great. Great to speak to you again, and thank you so much for taking time out on such a historical day. I'm sure you're quite busy. It's really well appreciated, so thank you.
No, my pleasure. Happy Brexit Day.
Yes, happy Brexit Day. Is there a cake? No.
Not as yet, but the team in the office may have one later, I think.
Okay, great, cool. So, David, can you, just for the viewers' purpose, explain what's happening? So I know obviously it's just not a rip the Band-Aid off approach. What are the steps involved now that the UK is officially leaving the European Union?
So where we're at the moment is obviously, tomorrow morning Sydney time, but at 11 o'clock UK time, the UK formally leaves the European Union. That's after the transition deal, or the withdrawal deal rather, that Boris Johnson managed to agree with the European Union. This month passed both the UK Parliament and then more recently this week, the European Parliament. Having passed through those parliaments, it's now into law, and the UK is leaving at 11 p.m. Friday, the 31st of January. What does that mean? Well, actually, nothing huge happens tonight. Ben won't bong. They didn't manage to raise the funds to make. Indeed, very across the UK, some of whom are very keen to obviously leave. Some who this is happening. What does it actually mean in terms of business? Well, actually, nothing changes immediately, because part of the withdrawal agreement is there is a transition period. During that transition period, the rules and circumstances of business don't change, and that will extend currently until the 31st of December this year. So that's the next 11 months, during which time the UK and the EU will endeavour to sign a trade arrangement, which will cover probably a lot more than just free trade, I'd suggest. And during that period, Australia will also, and other countries, the US and Japan, and our friends across the ditch in New Zealand, will be able to start negotiating free trade agreements, none of which would be able to be finalised. Well, they can be finalised, but they can't come into force until after that transition period ends. So at the moment, business as usual for the next 11 months.
Great, thanks, Dave. Well, you've stolen one of my questions there about free trade agreements, but you've answered a lot of that already. So, have those countries sort of? My understanding is they've already started that sort of process in preparation to start to build a framework of free trade agreements.
Yeah, that's right. So back in 2016, shortly after the referendum in September of that year, Stephen Chobo, the then Trade Minister of Australia, met with Liam Fox, Secretary of State for International Trade in the UK, and signed what was called the Trade Working Group Agreement, which is basically an opportunity for officials from each country to start talking but not negotiating about what the future relationship needs to be between Australia and the UK. Part of that process has been visits by both to either country, lots of dialogue around different streams and areas that they would like to explore through the negotiations, but no formal negotiation per se. And the normal process for a free trade agreement in terms of negotiating is that both countries put forward a mandate to their parliament or through a process. The UK is clarifying its mandate process at the moment, and therefore doesn't have a mandate to negotiate with Australia in place yet. Australia, on the other hand, does have a mandate ready and in place to negotiate with the UK when the time is right. So we just need to wait for that process. Nothing could happen before 11 o'clock tonight UK time, because the UK is still a member of the EU, and as such is unable to negotiate anything independent of the EU, because that's part of the deal of membership, if you like. So they're in a position now where they're able to just have a breath, I think, probably at 11 o'clock tonight, and then start putting those mandates be that through the Parliament or through the Cabinet process, probably the Cabinet process and then the Parliament, depending on how that actually shapes up. Having done this for 40 odd years, there's a little bit of and process issues that just need to be addressed. I'm fairly comfortable that those are in hand, and we should see the start of free trade agreements, negotiations with Australia in the near future.
Great, thanks, David. No, it's definitely an important part of all global trade these days, having free trade agreements in place with countries, but especially, obviously, the historical relationship between Australia and the UK. It's an important one for us going forward. So, David, I suppose as a holistic point of view, Australian companies have been a little bit wary about what's going on between the Brexit over the last couple of years. But now that it's actually happening, do you see that it's a bit of a reinvigoration of trade and investment opportunities between the two countries?
Look, I think that's the common perception, is there's been a great awareness, in fact, of Brexit. And I think that's not actually true when you look at the numbers. Australian investment in the UK continues to rise. UK investment in Australia continues to rise. We're now over 900 billion in two-way investment. So that's not necessarily true. Has it put off some people? Has it delayed some of these investment decisions? I'm sure, and I'm aware of plenty of cases where that's true. But certainly there still continues to be a really strong investment pipeline. If you look at one of our members, for example, is Lendlease, and in the last probably 12 or 18 months, they've won around $49 billion worth of work in the UK. That's just in Australian dollars.
Wow. Yeah,
everything from the Athletes Village for the Birmingham Commonwealth Games through to major projects in London, the Euston Station redevelopment, which in and of itself is a 30 or 40 year project.
Wow.
And a regeneration project. Plenty of stuff still happening. I think we've talked a lot in Australia recently, particularly after the bushfires, about being open for business. The UK has been and will remain and will continue to be very keen to seek Australian investment and investment indeed from everywhere around the world. And that's part of their global Britain strategy behind the decision to leave the European Union. The idea that, yes, we have these great friends in Europe, but there are other great friends around the world that we want to encourage to be part of what we're doing here in the UK. And that's a great strategy. It's great for us in Australia because they're a trusted partner. They're people we've dealt with for over a couple of hundred years now. And there's great synergies between our markets. And the opportunities for trade have also gone up. So we're talking of over 30 billion, around $30 billion in two-way trade. And there's a whole variety of different sectors that we're seeing that in. So the opportunities are there. There's bucket loads to do, and we're here to help people engage and embrace those opportunities to invest and trade.
Yeah, fantastic, David. I think that I want to ask as well, before we move on to some of the initiatives that you're putting forward to help Australian companies equip themselves and be more engaged again with UK, and as you say, take advantage of these new opportunities again. Are there certain sectors that may emerge out of this? Are there different sort of sectors? I know, obviously, as you just pointed out, trade it's still grown, and the investment's grown. Are there any other new sectors that will come about because of the exit?
Look, I think the reality is that both Australia and the UK are well-developed countries. We both have fairly wealthy populations. We have a high level of development and skills. There are lots of things that we already do together, but I think where this opportunity really leads us is, yes, there's the things that you'll hear about most are trading goods, because when people talk about free trade, their immediate thoughts, particularly here in Australia, are around how do we sell more beef or lamb, or how do we get our grain exports or others into these markets and further into these markets. And certainly Australia has been hampered in the past in our relationship with the EU with tariff quotas and tariff rate quotas, making some of those opportunities to trade limited by those tariffs and by the way that the barriers are set. So there's opportunities for us to reimagine those with the UK. I think it's probably important to say, I don't see the Australian beef industry that spent quite a lot of money and time and effort over the last 10, 15 years and is using the free trade agreements we have with places like Japan, China, Korea. I don't see them going, oh, we don't have to do that anymore, we'll just go to the UK.
Yeah.
I think the opportunity for the Australian market is there's more we can do now potentially in the UK in some of those sectors, particularly around agriculture, that we weren't able to do before. So if we can look to encourage and engage a little bit further, that will strengthen the diversity of markets that we're playing in. And as any good business person, as any good investor will tell you, that diversity is the key to a sustainable, long-term, successful portfolio of investments. So equally with trading partners, you want to be able to ride the ups and downs of the global landscape by having people in and having markets in different places. So I think the opportunities around that are there. I think in terms of new markets and new opportunities, I think the services sector of the Australian economy and the UK economy, there are opportunities there if we can work in the next period through the free trade agreement process to work on mutual recognition of standards and of qualifications, looking to improve the access to markets for people flows between the two places, looking at ways in which we can develop and grow the collaboration between, for example, the space agencies who signed a space bridge late last year. We've already got the FinTech bridge. We're doing a lot of work in particularly around infrastructure and health, but equally you could pick education, you could look at defence and the fact that BAE, the $35 billion Hunter class frigates program won by BAE Australia. BAE in the UK are producing the same class of ship in
David,
Glasgow, so there's opportunities there for us to look at supply chain opportunities between the two countries around those projects. So I think there's lots on the go, and I think anything new is not necessarily new. There's sectors that are already there. I don't see particularly a new sector that doesn't exist anywhere else. But I think the ability to drive some of the newer technologies, things around AI, around open banking and financial services, as Australia moves towards.
Sorry, David.
Opportunities there.
Sorry, David, to cut you off. I've got to wrap up because we've got the next show starting shortly. But I really want to touch base with yourself again in a couple of weeks or a month or so, just to follow up on the progress and how things are going, if that's okay with you, because there's obviously a lot to watch in this space, and some of those topics you've just mentioned we want to highlight, and also talk about the initiatives the Australian British Chamber of Commerce are putting on around the country, and some of those events. So we want to definitely get you back on very quickly and talk about how companies, importers and exporters, current and aspiring, can get along to those events and engage better with the chamber and really tap into these opportunities. So thanks so much again for joining us. It's been a real privilege, and again I really appreciate you taking the time for such a busy day, and we definitely look forward to having you on the show again very near future.
My pleasure. If I could just ask one thing. If you're a business that currently works between Australia and the UK, go back, have a look at your business as usual model, and have a look if there's anything that a free trade agreement or a discussion between the two governments might unpick and make a little bit easier for you to do. Now's the time to put your submissions into the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade here in Australia, or into the Department of International Trade in the UK, and indeed tell us about it, because we're the ones who are going to be making this, helping them guided through that negotiation, and we're the ones that can help make you that difference to improve your business as usual too.
Fantastic advice, and thanks. I'll definitely spread the word around that as well. Thanks again, David, and congratulations on a great historical day, and look forward to speaking to you again very soon.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right.